Metro to comply with federal law. Metro has on its board 8 members, 2 of which appointed by Maryland, Virginia, DC, and the federal government. Congresswoman Barbara Comstock put an amendment in Congress recently to change the appointees from the federal government from the General Services Administration to the U.S. Department of Transportation, which actually makes a lot more sense, given that the U.S. Department of Transportation regulates Metro and decides what funding goes to Metro. It makes sense they'd be the appointees. The bill passed overwhelmingly in Congress, and now we simply have to update the compacts. First of all, is there an amendment at the desk? Nature substitute.
So we have a line amendment.
We do a line
amendment is to add an emergency clause.
Actually, it's to strike
the emergency clause. That's probably a good tactical decision.
So I would ask first that the amendment be.
It's a long bill, but you're on page 22 on line 1,298 is striking the emergency clause. We have a motion on that line amendment, moved and seconded. Hearing no debate, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, all right. So the bill now is only 1,297 lines long.
Well, except that, Mr. Chairman, if you look at the bill, there are only 2 changes in these 22 pages, and they're both on page 2. And all the bill does is strike out the Administrator of General Services and substitutes the Secretary of the United States Department of Transportation. And so the entire bill is the change of those words on page 2. And that would make Virginia comply with federal law. DC and Maryland are going to do the same. If we don't do this, then there'd be all kinds of legal questions as to the validity of what the board does, because the compacts wouldn't agree, and that would cause all kinds of judicial mischief. So
Delegate Levine, have all the other signatory states of the compact enacted this change?
they are in the process of enacting it. The federal government has, of course, and DC and Maryland are both doing so.
Delegate Brenner or Delegate Crowell?
I looked yesterday when Senate Transportation was considering this bill. It's on the calendar for Maryland to look at the same bill on February 25th. So they're in session right now as well.
And Delegate, our Senator, former Delegate Eben has the bill on the Senate side. Senate Transportation reported out, I believe, yesterday, right?
Correct, without the emergency clause.
Right.
So this would match the Senate bill.
Senator Eben believes this to be very important. Congresswoman Barbara Comstock also believes this to be very important.
As does Delegate Jim Lemon, my chief co-patron.
As does Delegate Jim Lemonian. Delegate Garrett.
Levine, why did we not just simply, we've signed on the compact. The compact says we have to change the compact composition. Why do we have to put it in our code?
Because the compact is in our code. I'm not sure I understand the question.
Yeah, so there's a compact volume, and if you come sit at one of our interesting code commission meetings, you can learn all about the history of compacts and which ones have and haven't been codified. This is a codified compact, as I understand it. The rest of the compacts are becoming codified or removed as obsolete as we are eliminating the compact volume. And so, I pay attention to code commission. So it actually already is in the code, it is codified. Had this been in the compacts volume and had we been keeping the compacts volume, you could have done it differently maybe, but because we're not and it isn't. If one wanted to make this change, this would be the procedural way to do it. And if one didn't want to make the change, the procedural way to do that would be to not report the bill. Those would be your 2 options. Yeah, or just tell them to go screw themselves. You got a problem with that? I don't live up there. Me too.
I see the change, changing the federal government appointee from the Administrator of General Services to the Secretary of DOT. I get that, but functionally, what does it do?
What the bill would do is it says that Virginia agrees with Maryland, DC, and the federal government, that the federal government 2 designees come from the U.S. Department of Transportation rather than the GSA. Otherwise, if we disagree, then if the Metro Board, let's say, says that the people who maintain the brakes aren't doing a good job and they fire them, then that person could sue and say, well, these compacts differ and we're not sure what's valid or not, and there could be all kinds of judicial proceedings to determine whether or not we agreed to the compact, and it would cost a lot of money and time that we really don't need to spend.
Delegate Levine, what happens if we report your bill and then DC or Maryland and the administration's there make a crazy decision and have a terrible patron carry their versions of the bills in those jurisdictions, and those bills were to fail in those jurisdictions, and then we would have inconsistent statutory compact language, what would be the consequence of that?
One, I'd say that was exceedingly unlikely, because from what I understand, Maryland and DC are proceeding apace. But if that were to happen, I'm sure that the people of Maryland and DC would be very upset with their legislators and would get them to reconsider. Because, we'd be out of compliance with federal laws.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is, what you're saying is we need to do this because they're gonna be, Congresswoman Comstock and others think it's a good idea. And then, so if you accept that, then we need to do it because they're gonna do it, so that keeps us in line. But if we did it and they didn't do it, we'd be in the same situation as if we didn't do it.
Actually, we'd be out of compliance with federal
When we
compact.
deal with codified compacts, do we put enactment clauses in there that the provision only becomes effective if the other signatory states pass similar language?
Actually, it's online.
I'm asking Nicole, I'm sorry.
Mr. Chairman, normally when you have just states being a party to a compact, if it's an area that is at all regulated by federal law, if this was just like Maryland and Virginia, you would put in an enactment clause saying it's not effective until the other state does it and it's consented to by Congress if it's an area that's regulated by federal law. In this case, since there are federal members of the compact, we're more or less conforming. It's not the same as another compact where it's just an agreement between the states. If we
I mean, again, if we pass this and Maryland doesn't pass this, then we are making ourselves inconsistent.
Yes. I can easily put on an enactment that says it doesn't take effect until all of the parties make the same change. That would be a normal enactment clause to have on a compact.
Right. Doug, will you start and answer my question?
Well, 1294 says the title shall become effective. Now, this is the overall compact. Just line 1294 on page 22 shall become effective 90 days after the enactment of concurring legislation by or on behalf of DC, Maryland.
Yeah, that's the language that put it
In the
place
original
initially. The issue we have here is when the compact signatories become inconsistent, which is the whole point of your bill, to try to avoid the inconsistency, but someone's gotta go first.
Well, Congress
Creates the scenario of the inconsistency. So, Delegate Garrett.
Nicole, is there anywhere else in this 1,200 pages that describes how the compact can be changed or should be changed? There must be somewhere. Amendments and
Mr.
supplements number 84.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, Delegate Garrett, I would say starting on line 1275.
So, Mr. Chairman, this speaks to your point,
Yeah,
it's
got it in there.
concurred in by all the other.
The amendment or supplement shall not be immediately effective, and the previously enacted provision or provisions shall remain in effect in each jurisdiction until the amendment or supplement is approved by the other signatories and sent to by Congress. So let's talk about the code commission some more, because this is awesome. So this would be one of those scenarios, if we were to pass this, where the code, you wouldn't know from looking at the code that a provision wasn't in effect. You would only know that by looking at the acts of assembly, knowing when this happened, and then being able to track back to when the other states did it, because the code would just reflect the change. There wouldn't be a caption, right, Nicole, when they printed this that said, in effect, when Maryland does the same thing. It would just drop into the code.
Mr. Chairman, yes, that's correct, except that I updated the list of compacts that are online. So now if you look on the portal at compacts, some of them do have the brackets next to them that say not in effect, per the executive
Like the
board of the
I-73
code,
compact.
like the I-73 compact. So, if it's the will of the General Assembly for this to have not in effect next to it until I make sure Maryland and DC do it, it can easily appear that way online.
Mr.
Delegate Garrett.
So, thank you. Nicole, to follow up that, so why, as I'm reading now, further reading lines 125 to 1275 to 1280, it strikes me that the initial intent was for one signatory to adopt an amendment or supplement, and then the others would in effect fall in line, concurred in by all the others. So why is it that we have three different entities creating three different language in three different locations when the founding fathers of this compact deemed it most prudent to have one of the signatories or any of the signatory parties determine what that amendment or supplement should be, and then subsequently have the others.
Mr. Chairman, Delegate Garrett, it's my understanding that it's usually just because all of the parties to the compact don't meet or don't have their session at the same time, somebody has to go first. And if one, in any scenario, if one party to a compact decided to go rogue and change their compact, it wouldn't go into effect unless the other parties agreed.
Does, Kelly Levine, does, the three signatories are Maryland, DC, and Virginia.
I would say that Congress would consider.
Well, I mean, the signatories are defined, and then Congress consents in here. So does DC take action through the DC City Council, or does
Yes.
Congress take action?
DC takes action to DC City Council.
Okay, and so has DC City Council heard this yet?
They were waiting for us to go first.
Okay, so as I understand this, with the three jurisdictions, one would do it, the others would consent to it through whatever their procedure is, and I assume it's legislative like ours, and then Congress, I mean, we would approve it, and then Congress would consent to it. Congress has prospectively consented to it, as I understand it.
Correct.
Which
That's my interpretation.
yeah. So Congress essentially said, when y'all do this, we agree. Which I whatever. I'm sure they can do that. So, okay. And the signatories, just so you know, to answer the question, are on line 66. They are the state of Maryland, the Commonwealth of Virginia, and the District of Columbia. Congress is not a signatory, but they're a party that is required to consent to any changes, because WMATA is, because federal law is implicated here. Okay? Anybody here speak in favor of the bill?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Jennifer Mitchell, Director of the Department of Rail and Public Transportation. It is very important that we enact this so that we are in conformance with the FAST Act at the federal level and also with the changes that are being made by Maryland and DC. As Nicole mentioned, Maryland is moving forward with this with identical language and expect to hear it in committee. We expect that DC is going to convene this or bring this either in March or April to the City Council, but it's very important. We do know that the federal government would like to be able to reappoint or appoint new members in the not too distant future, and so we don't want to have any cloud of uncertainty about any inconsistencies between our compact language and the FAST Act.
Let me ask you a question. If we wanted to wait for one of the other jurisdictions to go first, you said, I think Nicole said that Maryland is acting in February, in a week.
It's docketed for February 25th.
Yeah, so could we wait for that and then take action on the Senate bill that's coming back over to bring us into consistency with them if they act?
I would hope that we would be able to act on it today. I believe that Maryland is going to move forward with it. They do not have any, from what I understand, concerns about the language, and it's all been developed in good faith between all three of the signatories.
Yes.
Jennifer, excuse me, are there other parts of this compact that the RPT would like to change?
Not at this time. I know that Delegate Lemunion had introduced a resolution, I'm not sure if it's going to be moving forward, but urging the governor in Virginia to work with the governor in Maryland and the mayor of DC to review portions of the compact, particularly those related to governance and funding, and come back with recommendations to the General Assembly in 2018. That's something that we would support doing. We think it's always a good idea to continue to review the provisions of the compact, but at this point in time, we would only recommend making this one change.
Delegate Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know exactly what Delegate Levine and Congressman Comstock are doing here, but what this bill is functionally doing is re-ratifying the compact. We are, in a sense, re-blessing this compact. Again, I understand the needs to be compliant with FAST Act and federal law, but Mr. Chairman, as a native of Virginian, I see WMATA up close and personal. I see the compact. There are a lot of changes I think this General Assembly could do, suggesting reforms to WMATA. I don't think I can do that in the context of this bill. Obviously, that would take a lot of redrafting. But nevertheless, Mr. Chairman, I see a compact in front of us that needs some changes, and changes are probably best coming from this Commonwealth. So I may not be able to support this only because, again, I understand what it's trying to do. I understand, federal compliance, but there's just a lot of changes I'd like to see in the best interest of reforming this troubled authority.
Well, and I would say that, they want this, so if you want other stuff, not letting them have this is a good way to maybe get you other stuff. Delegate Phillips.
Question, Mr. Director. You mentioned earlier, and I believe Delegate Levine in this patron also mentioned that there would be certain consequences. What would the consequences be should this bill not pass?
I think one of our greatest concerns is that if there's any inconsistency between our compact and federal law, particularly as it relates to the appointment of federal members, should the federal government decide to appoint new members anytime in the near future, if there's an inconsistency there have been concerns raised about whether or not future board decisions could be overturned or could be invalidated because of concerns about whether or not the federal members were appointed appropriately.
Well, I mean, they can only appoint who the compact allows them to appoint. And so this is who they want to appoint, but the federal government wouldn't appoint the new people they want to appoint before we pass the compact.
No, not before we pass it.
Right.
No, not before we pass it.
Yeah. I mean, I know they want to put the Secretary of the Department of Transportation.
Yeah, he would not be on the board.
Right. Right, and so they want that person to make the pick.
Yes.
But they obviously would never do that until we gave them permission to make that change. It would just remain with the Administrative General Services until this compact is changed.
Correct. We
It
do
is
believe
there.
that DOT is the right agency to be able to do that, though.
Is there anything in the Federal Act that requires, that gives a window to take action? Or does the Federal Act just kick in once the compact's amended?
I don't recall that there's any time frame in the FAST Act. We could certainly check that, but it is, we do need to change the compact in order to be consistent with the FAST Act.
Yeah.
See Nicole checking.
I'm
All
not
right.
back there.
Yeah, it's gonna take a while. It's probably a 40,000 page bill. All right, anybody here, anything else?
No.
Okay, thank you so much. Anybody here speak in favor of the bill? Anybody here speak in opposition to the bill?
Chairman Habib Rob Whitfield, Fairfax County Taxpayers Alliance. I'm not opposed to the change proposed here, but I think it would be perhaps prudent to add in a line that the Joint Transportation Accountability Commission be instructed to investigate the compact for further revisions needed. I've tried over the last year to get Delegate Hugo to take up the matters of the WMATA compact and the whole business of oversight of WMATA. So I think that entity is probably tasked with the ability to do that. So I would ask that that be added as a possible amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else here speak to the bill? All right, Patron gets the last word.
I'd simply say that I think that Maryland and DC are going forward. If we were not to go forward, then we'd have conflicts with them as well as with Congressman Robert Comstock and the federal government.
Doug Garrett.
One final question, Delegate, or Jennifer, either one. Is there a time frame that the feds have said in something that's been codified at the federal level that says, thou shalt change this compact to say that it has to be the Secretary of USDOT? Is there a time frame they've said that has to be done in?
Yeah, there's no time frame specified here. It just, the law does read, though, that the signatory parties to the compact shall amend the compact as necessary in accordance with paragraph 1, which refers to the appointment of the federal directors. But there's no time frame specified for that change.
And Mr. Chairman, and for the committee, my thought right now is not knowing a great deal about this other than what we're talking about. It strikes me that there's leverage that can be applied at this point in time by the Commonwealth if there are things that substantively we need to change this compact. And to continue with the compact, we have to somehow change the structure of it, the composition of it. And all three of those signatories understand that we have to do that change. If that's the only change and everybody else is happy, and the feds have said thou shalt, and we have no other option, then so be it. On the other hand, if we do have other options, it doesn't have to be sort of done immediately. If everybody's waiting to see what our lead is, and our lead is, we think the compact is not perfect, and as Delegate Minshew has identified, it sounds like Delegate Munyon, perhaps others in the community have identified that perhaps there are elements of the compact that should be updated or changed or what have you. It just strikes me that I may be missing something, but if we have a leverage, it is now.
With all due respect, I don't know that I would consider this leverage necessarily. This is something that we need to do, that we've been directed to do by the Federal FAST Act. I don't know that it's something that necessarily gives us leverage over any of our other partners. There will be future opportunities to review and make amendments to the compact. It's something that is a very, as you've noted, it's a very long document, very complicated with a lot of provisions, will require substantial negotiation with our partners, and certainly not something that we can do unilaterally without getting agreement from our partners. I would not recommend that we use this as an opportunity to do a more comprehensive review of provisions of the compact that would have to change. There will be another opportunity to do that in the future, but I think this is so important to make it now so that we are in conformance with the Federal FAST Act after this session.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, just to follow up, I disagree, Jennifer. I think my inference is you just got through saying the other two don't care enough about the compact, that if we are willing to say we're not gonna be in compliance with the feds unless you change the compact, they would just say, well, then we're not. I would just disagree with you.
Mr. Chairman,
Delegate Toscano.
I know that there's a lot of consternation about WMATA, but let's not get that bound up with what is essentially a ministerial duty, I think, to do this and not run afoul of the FAST Act, which might have some pretty serious consequences that we're not fully aware. So I think we're sort of playing a little bit with fire here, and as my colleague Delegate Kilgore says, get your own bill. If you want to change the compact, you want to withdraw from the compact. If we want to ask the chair to send a letter to the Transportation Accountability Group to study whether or not we ought to make other changes in the compact or proposal to change, well, let's do that. But let's not muddy up this water and get into something we're not quite sure the implications of. This is a pretty simple change. It's proposed by our Congresswoman. It got passed by the Congress, a major bit of news, that they'd pass anything. But it's got a lot of support from around the Commonwealth. So let's just make this simple change and move on.
Delegate Minshew.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I move that we recommend a report to the bill.
I'll recognize the motion in just a moment. I've already called Delegate Minshew.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As with Director Mitchell, let's assume that there was a fervent desire on behalf of the General Assembly to explore some text changes, reforms to the WMATA compact. If we would not do it in the context of a bill such as this that is functionally re-ratifying the compact, how would you suggest we do it?
You certainly could direct us to review the compact with our partners in Maryland and DC and come back to you with recommendations, particularly anything regarding governance structure or funding. That is one, certainly that's something that we'd be happy to do.
All right, so just before we recognize the motion, keep in mind we have a Senate bill coming over. Does that come out of the full Senate yet, Nicole, or is it just come out of Senate Transportation?
Just out of the committee, it would be on first reading tomorrow.
Okay, so I think we'll see that next week. We'll come over right after crossover. Between now and then, hopefully Maryland will act. So, okay, Delegate Toscano moves to report. Delegate Phillips seconds. Any debate on the motion? All right, hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
No.
Okay, the bill fails to report. Thank you, sir. Delegate Keene.